Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by friend in life, and the reviews are in, John Paulsen, and that is that people like the 30-minute catch-up between us once a week. So I know you are used to relaxing, going into the cave, doing projections, best ball happening earlier than ever. We'll get to that in a bit. But I may be forced, unfortunately, to call on you for 20 to 30 minutes every week. Are you okay with that?
You're putting me on the spot as we record. I have to answer yes to be a company man. Yeah, I could probably do this. There might be some weeks where I'm out on vacation or whatever, but yeah, I can certainly devote 30 minutes of my work week to catching up with you, John. And we got some stuff happening today as we begin to record this podcast.
You have a lot more moving pieces than me, so totally fine if I need to pinch hit for you and find someone else from time to time. But like me, when you have no partner, no kids, then I can just sit down and get right to it. And that's what we're going to do right now. Quickly, though, before we begin, just a quick reminder that the 4for4 betting subscription has now reopened ahead of the NFL draft. Far and away our most profitable, outside of Noonan's tackle props, our most profitable event of last year. And right now, although I told corporate not to, they don't listen to me. And they are also giving away, if you sign up by February 28th for the betting subscription, they will also give you a free sub to BetSports Golf. Basically the same value for free. And already, Noonan has hit 2 outright props to start the PGA 2023 season. I hit a first-round leader last week. So we're doing our best to try to make sure you get back your money on that sub as quickly as possible. But right now, sign up for the 4for4 betting sub, and you will get BetSports Golf for free. But, Paulsen, let's jump right into it, because coming down the pipe right before we got on together is the news that a Clark County grand jury has officially indicted Alvin Kamara and 3 others for an alleged beating at a Las Vegas nightclub last year. If you recall, this is the same incident that he went into the regular season pending because we were not sure if he was going to get suspended at the beginning, middle, or end of the year. And eventually it got pushed into the offseason. And here we are now. All we know at this time right now is that this indictment means the criminal case will immediately bypass a justice court in Las Vegas, the county where it happened, and instead get moved to district court for March 2nd. It could get pushed back for March 2nd, but right now it just seems like Alvin Kamara's status, at least short term, given that a suspension may happen, is up in the air. So what are your overall thoughts right now, since best ball drafts have launched at both Underdog and FFPC already?
Yeah, I mean, I was getting ready to talk about how Kamara in the 6th round was looking like a good value, but I think with this news, his availability for 2023 season is very much up in the air. The indictment's pretty serious, and depending on how this court case progresses, we should probably get our friend Drew Davenport on at some point, or at least get him linked in with his tweet threads about this. But certainly indicates that he's in some trouble, and usually when NFL players get into trouble like this, they end up with some sort of suspension. So I think, probably not too worried about Kamara spending the entire season in jail or anything like that, but, he could certainly see an 8-game suspension or something like that and pretty much submarine his 2023 value in terms of where he's going right now in 2023 best ball drafts.
Especially since we are still waiting on the news of who the Saints will have at quarterback next. We're not expecting Winston to start, Andy Dalton, the free agent. So that shakeup matters as well. I can guarantee you, since I had to commit to Davenport's poker night a month early, he'll make some time for us next week. He'll stop by for a few minutes and talk about this situation with us more in depth, since he's the expert. A couple other things I wanted to touch on with you was that the 2023 coaching cycle has now come to a close in what I truly believe is the best cycle we've seen in the last decade plus, probably. I'd have to think a long time back before I had at least some kind of faith in every single coach that was hired. But this year's coaching cycle certainly renewed my faith and positivity in the NFL and continued to go the right direction and getting younger, more progressive thinking minds for both offense and defense. And that, of course, closed with the last 2 hires, and Jonathan Gannon being hired by the Cardinals, coming over from Philadelphia, of course, getting undressed by Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy in his sign-off game. And then Stane Steichen being hired by the Colts. For Gannon, I believe it's really just going to be about getting along with Kyler Murray. Just like Peyton and Russell Wilson, Gannon has to make sure he's on the same page with Kyler, given that the $230 million long-term extension is already there. So they will certainly keep Kyler or lean with Kyler over Gannon no matter what. Steichen, of course, lots of pieces up in the air here. I'm not sure if you actually saw Jim Irsay's hiring conference for Steichen, but Irsay even came out and mentioned, quote unquote, we're not hiding. No one can shy away from the fact of what a quarterback means in this league and how we have to look going forward, where Shane and Chris Ballard really dig into this draft and see where we're at. He also continued on and said, the Alabama guy, of course, Bryce Young, he said the Alabama guy doesn't look too bad, I'll tell you, as Chris Ballard whips his head around really quickly because he needs his owner to shut the hell up because he's given away their tails already. So just your thoughts on the final two hires of this offseason.
Well, I think with Gannon and the Cardinals, it really depends on who they bring in at offensive coordinator. From a fantasy standpoint, that's our concern. It's not really the defensive-minded head coach that's the issue. For Indianapolis, I mean, I think this probably bodes well for Jonathan Taylor in the running game in Indianapolis. I mean, Philly was pretty run heavy. A lot of that came from the quarterback situation there with Jalen Hurts being such a good running quarterback, but they also ran the ball quite a bit with their trio of running backs, and they didn't, feature a guy, but there were quite a few runs called, and that could bode well for Jonathan Taylor.
I can also close this press conference with, I thought was one of the more interesting sentences we've heard from a new head coach. And that is, he said, we will pass to score points and run to win. And it's like, finally, we have some faith in the Colts. Although Jeff Saturday poured one out, will be missed for the weekly dunce moves he made. But very happy with the overall coaching cycle. Best ball, though, is open for all the sickos at Underdog. The big board, the Superflex draft, launched. At FFPC, they also launched an early best ball contest, $35 entry as well, $400,000 guaranteed, I believe, in the prize pool. But right now, let's talk about Underdog and half-point PPR scoring, because Sam Hoppen, per request, jumped in there, did whatever the hell he does to change API, and now our Underdog ADP tool at 4for4.com, which is free to everyone, is up and running. So it's already dragging everything in for us. And what we're seeing so far, I think is interesting to start, Paulsen, is at the top, 3 quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts are currently being drafted in the first 2 rounds, which means in the first run of drafts, what was last year's big 6 between those 3, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, and Kyler Murray, remember, they were all grouped together, has now been whittled down to the only 3 that averaged over 22 fantasy points per game, and all 3 actually averaged over 24, providing at least 2 more points per game than anyone else at their position. So since everyone drafts from last year's stats, we are now seeing those 3 at the top that I mentioned separate from the others. So what are your overall thoughts on an early glance at best ball ADP at the quarterback situation?
Yeah, I think we have a situation where it's unusual compared to the last several years where, a lot of people would preach late round quarterback, myself included. I think the depth at the position now doesn't look as appealing as it, did in the last 10 years or so. I'm just looking down the list in order: Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Burrow, Fields, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert at QB 7, Trevor Lawrence at 8, Dak Prescott at 9. And then after that, things are getting really dicey. You have Deshaun Watson, who played terrible from a fantasy standpoint, coming back for Cleveland for a brief stint at QB 10. Kirk Cousins, who's, you're very likely to get low-end QB1 numbers if you have Kirk Cousins, but he's not going to win any leagues for you. Mm-hmm. Tua, who had dealt with a pretty bad concussion situation end of year, still in the concussion protocol a few weeks after the season, at 12. Daniel Jones at 13. Kyler Murray injured, unlikely to be ready week 1. QB 14. Jared Goff, Russell Wilson. I mean, we're getting into some dicey names, players you don't really want to be going into the fantasy season with as your starter. I think there's 9 that I would be pretty comfortable with down through Prescott, the first 9 I mentioned. And then after that, unappealing. So what's going to happen and what you're seeing with the ADP of 14 for Mahomes, 16 for Josh Allen, 16 for Jalen Hurts going in by the middle of the second round, you're seeing managers just jump on the really stable, high producing quarterbacks and letting everybody else fight over the scraps. And there's going to be some teams that are going to be left out in the cold as the music ends and they don't have a seat to sit in terms of a good quarterback. Burrow, I think, solid. Fields is pretty solid. Lamar Jackson, if he's healthy, very solid. Herbert should be better this year with the new OC coming over from Dallas. Lawrence should be solid. Prescott should be solid. But, after that, how many of these guys do you really want to run out there every week?
To that point, any thoughts on Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr? Because I can already foresee it happening where they land in what is perceived as a favorable situation. Rodgers right now is a favorite, -150 last I checked, I believe, to join the Raiders. But Peter King has also reported that the Jets are going to try heavily to trade for him. And then if they miss out, probably try to swing a deal for Lamar Jackson. But either way, Rodgers has suitors out there. And Derek Carr, we know, nearly signed with the Saints. But the issue is if Derek Carr lands with talent around him, I still question his value for fantasy because we did this last year. And since 2017, since he underwent that major fibula surgery, he hasn't finished top 20 in fantasy points per game among quarterbacks. Last year, finished as QB 22, despite being steamed up as a high to mid-range QB 2 overall. And so it just seems like people will chase Derek Carr again, even though we now have this running 5-year sample where he doesn't matter for fantasy whatsoever. So just thoughts on if those veterans land in favorable situations on the market.
Yeah, I think Rodgers initially is the first big domino to fall, and we'll see. I think there's still some concern that he might retire. I don't really subscribe to that. I actually do think that the Tom Brady retirement does affect Rodgers and whether or not he wants to sit on the stage while Tom Brady's celebrated as the GOAT in 5 years. He has scoffed at that thinking, but to me, I think he probably plays another year, and whether or not it's with the Packers or he asks for a trade, certainly things are heading towards a trade from the vibe I'm getting from the news. Just from Rodgers' demeanor, he seems to be okay with it and open to it. The Packers, you could understand last year wanting to run it back when you have a back-to-back MVP and you think you can run it back one more time. The receivers didn't come together the way that they had hoped until maybe midseason, and even then, and then the defense didn't play nearly as well as they had hoped that it would be able to carry them into the playoffs. So it just seems like he's headed for a departure, and if he lands in Vegas with his old man or his old friend Devontae Adams, I think that's certainly an appealing landing spot for him. Darren Waller there as well, Hunter Renfrow, Matt Collins. They have some pieces there. He would probably move up. Right now, he's sitting in terms of ADP at 19. I think part of that is some retirement fears. So if he does get traded and he's in for another season, I think he'll climb up 4 or 5 spots, get into that Goff, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray area, because he does have QB1 upside, especially with the quarterback landscape that we have now, especially with Devontae Adams. Carr, you brought up some very good points. I think prior to last season, he was pretty consistently top 15 guy, maybe not points per game, but he'd always be available for you. He was playing full season, so he was a compiler, and he was finishing fairly well. And last year was supposed to be really his breakthrough season with Devontae Adams coming in. I think that was his best set of weapons that he had, and it just didn't come together for him at all. Waller was kind of in and out of the lineup. Renfrow was in and out of the lineup, but he always had Devontae, and they just didn't always click like you were expecting them to based on their college rapport. So if he lands with the Jets, let's say pretty good receiving core there, he still doesn't offer anything as a runner. And you're probably going to have some growing pains there with a new receiving core. I'd rather have Geno Smith. I'd rather have a Goff who ran a pretty efficient offense in Detroit. Even Russell Wilson's kind of appealing now with Sean Payton in there. You could roll the dice and see if he can have a career resurgence. Daniel Jones has been solid. If he stays with the Giants, he was a top 10, top 12 quarterback last year, so no reason he can't do that again. So I think I would take all those guys over Derek Carr for various reasons.
Geno Smith, of course, who will likely reset the market for median quarterbacks, since the top guys, the younger players, continue resetting for one another with X amount of guaranteed money, if not fully guaranteed, like the Deshaun Watson contract. Geno Smith, we finally have someone who won't get the $31 million franchise tag, but who his franchise values highly. So a multi-year a multi-year extension for 20 to 25 million, I think, is in play, which is something the market needs right now, especially with Daniel Jones still out there as a free agent as well. You also talked about Darren Waller. And right now, I think the tight end landscape is something interesting to discuss as well, given that Travis Kelce is a top 5 pick, and Mark Andrews, the tight end 2, the next one being drafted behind Kelce, is currently going at the end of the 3rd round, an underdog. Kelce, of course, averaged 4 more points per game than the next closest tight end. He was the only tight end to record at least 90 receptions, and he reached 110. And then in his age 33 season last year, finished second only to the great Chigakonkwo, who his coach hates him, in yards per route run at their position. So overall, just thoughts on the tight end landscape right now.
Yeah, I think you look at what Kelce's season was. He just, once again, proved the doubters wrong. I had some doubts, not so much in his role in that offense, because I knew it was going to be a monster one with Tyreek Hill out, but he was starting to show some signs of slowing down in terms of his yards per catch, yards per game last season, 2021. Now 2022, those numbers back up. I guess his yards per reception were about the same, 12.2, but yards per game, 78. Obviously, 12 touchdowns is better than 9 touchdowns. It was big in the red zone, huge in the red zone for the Chiefs. He's still, you wonder about the Chiefs. Are they going to get a little bit complacent, or do they still have a chip on their shoulders and continue to work? But Kelce's a pro. He looks like a, middle of the first, early first round pick in terms of his advantage that he gives you at the tight end position. I think you mentioned Mark Andrews. If he's going late 3rd, mid to late 3rd, I think he's a nice play, but it really depends on if Lamar Jackson sticks around at quarterback or who they have throwing the ball there. I think TJ Hockenson played really well for the Vikings after the trade, was a huge part of that offense. So I would be comfortable with him as my tight end 1. He's going pick 42. So if you don't want to take Kelce in the first and you can get Andrews or Hockenson near that 3-4 turn, I think that's a pretty good plan at tight end. And after that, George Kittle, pretty solid. We know he can play really well, just kind of a weird offense sometimes for him. Dallas Goedert, they're both sort of in that same vein of lower volume passing attacks, but highly, highly efficient. I like Goedert a lot as a player, but Philly is unlikely to really throw the ball any more than they did last year. But he was really a consistent threat, but he was doing it more on 4 to 6 targets per game, instead of maybe 8, 9 targets per game like you'd like out of your tight end 1. But you can get him in the 5th round. So I think at that point, my comfort level stops. We don't know what we're going to get from Kyle Pitts. Darren Waller, we don't know who his quarterback is. Is he getting on the back end of his career? Can he stay healthy? Dalton Schultz, I think, is fairly safe. Just kind of not exciting upside pick, but does very well with Dak Prescott over the last couple of years. And I think my big question is Evan Ingram. Does he return to Jacksonville? He had a career resurgence there. And then you do have some interesting upside players. And David Njoku with perhaps a better Deshaun Watson. Cole Kmet had a kind of a breakout season when they finally let Justin Fields throw the ball. Obviously, Greg Dulcich had a good run there. And Sean Payton is used to using his tight end in the passing game. So there is some upside late, but I'm not going to fall for that this year. I'm going to try to get one of these top 4 or 5 guys and let everybody else fight over the scraps. This might be an early QB, early tight end year for me.
Wild scenes out there early on. Kittle also tight end 2 in points per game, but it's almost like a 3-headed argument because he was not that until Brock Purdy took over and Deebo Samuel got injured. And then, of course, Kittle from week 14 on led the NFL in receiving touchdowns. But also you could argue we just want our tight ends to have that capability, whereas a lot don't have any ceilings worth chasing anyhow. So probably still worth chasing despite the micro splits we'll definitely get into over the next 5 months at that position. And finally, something else that stood out to me was just the current running back landscape, because much like how the cordyceps virus infects everyone in The Last of Us, rookie fever, once February hits, it's all over. Everyone goes blind and just chases what they perceive to be the next best thing, no matter what the actual outcome will be. And right now, I think nothing says that more than Bijan Robinson having a 14 overall ADP in the big board as the RB4 ahead of Saquon Barkley. Of course, unrestricted free agent Saquon Barkley as the RB5. So just your thoughts when you initially looked at the current running back position.
Well, we saw it. We did our 4-for-4 mock draft, and I was surprised, but I was seeing quite a bit of good running back depth, even into the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. Like good players that normally are gone 2nd, 3rd round. Maybe they're starting to decline a little bit. I'm just looking at the underdog ADP, which is a little bit separate than what we did over at Sleeper, but Tony Pollard, Najee Harris in the 4th round, DeAndre Swift, Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, 4th or 5th turn. You can get him in the 5th round, as late as the 5th round. I was going to say Aaron Jones and Alvin Kamara, but now just mentioned Jones going in the 6th round. There's some rumors that he might get cut, but I don't think that the Packers are going to do that if they make a change at quarterback. Cam Akers, who had a pretty good late season run for the Rams after a really weird early midseason situation there with the Rams, getting
wanting to get traded, trying to trade him, and then realizing he can't be traded. Yeah.
And then he did pretty well at the end. And then James Conner, I think too.
Great.
James Conner, 7th round, those two guys. You can get a quality RB2 right now in underdog in that 7th round. Conner, I believe, posted mid to low end fantasy RB1 numbers after the injury. He was basically what we thought he was going to be after he came back from that injury in terms of workload. So what that tells me is that there's lots of different options this year in terms of how you want to construct your team. And if you do want to go quarterback, tight end early, there are some guys that are going to be available there in the middle rounds. As of right now, I mean, everything's going to change, but there's quite a bit of depth at running back right now. And if you want to build around the stud quarterback, stud tight end, and then just kind of fill in your running backs and wide receivers around that, there are going to be players available later on in the draft that are pretty appealing, and they're going to have perhaps 20 plus touch workloads.
Anything else for you get out of here that stood out to you? Like, for instance, we haven't talked about wide receiver. I looked at the top. You unsurprisingly see Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Cooper Kupp. Kupp, of course, who had 5 100-yard games out of 6 starts with Matthew Stafford. So Kupp was well on his way to competing as the overall wide receiver 1 yet again, if not only he got injured, but if everyone around him didn't fall either. So anything you saw at wide receiver at first glance?
Yeah, I think it's you have your studs and then you have your 2nd tier and 3rd tier, and you're trying to see like how deep that middle round depth is. My plan over the last few years has been at least one running back early and then pounding the receiver position for a while, because you can getting a tight end as well and then pounding the receiver position rounds 3 through 6. And I still think that depth is there. You got Terry McLaurin going 57 overall, DJ Moore going 58 overall. These are good players. Drake London 59, Judy 58. Tyler Lockett 68, and then like Deontay Johnson's really jumped out at me at 80. If there's anybody that's got touchdown regression written all over him. It's Deontay Johnson. The question is, can Kenny Pickett throw touchdowns? I think that's my big question about Pittsburgh. So, but really a good player to get at pick 80. So I think there's depth at receiver as well. But I think if I was just looking at it right now and had to construct a draft plan, I think I probably would take a stud or two at receiver, try to grab a stud tight end and see if I get a Burrow or somebody at quarterback, and then hit a couple running backs in those middle rounds, and then start coming back to the running back or wide receiver position for my wide receiver 3, 4, 5. So it's so early. Things are going to change a lot as the hive mind eats itself. But I think the fact that there's depth at receiver is nothing new. I think it's going to be similar as it has been for the last 5 or 6 years.
And whether Keenan Allen is actually released since he's been away from team facilities, because that's the way it's headed right now. Whether DJ Moore gets a confident quarterback after he finishes the wide receiver 34 in points per game, despite scoring a career high in touchdowns. We will be here because I'm going to drag you out of your dark room for at least 10 minutes with me every single week. So what else do you have coming out right now for everyone, Paulsen, if anything? Maybe you're just going to watch your son play basketball. I don't know.
No, I've got the never too early rankings coming out probably Friday. I'll probably publish them on Friday. So it's just basically early gut call for best ball or early drafts. Won't be any major math or science behind it. Those full projections will come after the draft, and I'm able to assign all these players distributions and all that. But the gut rankings will be coming later this week.
We'll pull TJ out of hibernation and get some drafts going together here live soon. But until then, thanks for joining. Let's talk some Dynasty.
Thanks, John.